We are going live. Hanging with Scott Stevenson this morning. This is Dr. Scott. I'm regular Scott.
Mr. Scott, Dr. Scott, Scott.
I like regular Scott.
Regular Scott.
Dave calls you Smart Scott. Dave Crossland.
Smart Scott.
Yeah.
Clever Scott.
Clever
Scott.
Hans.
You ever heard of Clever Hans?
No.
Clever Hans. This is decades ago. There was a horse that supposedly could count. It could do math.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so what actually was happening is the horse's owner was sending some very slight body language messages. Just, keep going. Okay, stop.
Yeah.
Right? And it would just it would count with its paw, and wow, that Clever Hans is so clever.
That's amazing. Guys, we're going to get started in just a minute. Scott's trying to see if he can figure out how to do the screen share thing. Trying to get Scott to figure out technology live is it's difficult.
Well, that's easy. That's just a button. I'm trying to make sure that my what I want to show here is relatively seamless. I can show the basics.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, that's fine. Should we share screen?
Let's see if it
or
works.
You want to present the question? Okay, let's see.
We'll do a little test run here first, and I can even get rid of my screen too. We can both look at it.
Okay. I just clicked the share screen button. Unless there's a long delay, I did everything that should have happened.
Okay, so that's what I was afraid of.
Yeah, you just click share screen, and then you choose a window.
I'm not sure why it might not be working. It could be any number of things. It could be like having permissions or the particular browser you're on. Like we could troubleshoot that one, but it's a lot to ask and figure out, right? You know what I'm saying? Right, when we're about
nice
to start.
That it doesn't give you an error message or anything. It just makes it look like, you're doing everything right, and then
doing it right.
Failure.
Guys, just pretend that you can see Scott's screen. Oh yeah, we're following along, Scott. This looks really good. Keep showing us stuff. And all right,
no worries. We can roll without that. Yes.
Can we start with that Fortitude question?
Sure.
Over 40, 50, something like that. Mm-hmm. All right, that sounds like a good one to me. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds. Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally. We appreciate you guys tuning in this Sunday morning, or if you're catching this on the replay later. Of course, all of our programming is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK for savings over there. Plus, it supports our programming. We all need protein powder, right? We're all using supplements. You can get your supplements from True Nutrition. You know that they're high quality, cutting out the middleman by going straight to True Nutrition. They make products for a lot of other companies that Dante probably wouldn't want me just like throwing their names out there. But you can just get them straight from the source. Of course, we're brought to you by BYOBBcoach.com. That's Scott's book. Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. You can also get the hardcover. I'll have links to that below. And you can reach out to Scott, too, on his website for a consultation. You can reach out to me for coaching, mcnallydiets@gmail.com. Thank you to everybody from Patreon. I think we got a couple Patreon questions. Let's dive straight into this thing, Scott. You grabbed a bunch of questions from your followers over at Instagram. And I thought a great place to start, we love talking training here. I wanted to ask you this one. So what about guys that are starting to age? We'll say guys that are over 40. Would you still suggest Fortitude Training, or is there something that can be a better fit as we age?
First of all, everyone's different, so there's no universal one size fits all.
How would you describe Fortitude, by the way? If I had elevator pitch for anybody who doesn't know, elevator pitch where we've got 3 floors to go.
Right. Okay. Fortitude Training is a training system that utilizes basic principles of training, progressive overload, exercise variation, utilizing different frequencies, different volumes, so biological individuality, to allow a person to have both structure and customizability in the same program to fit the program to what works best for them.
Okay. And I would say quite progressive, right?
Yeah, there's the way I've broken it up is the 3 different set types. 2 of those are very progressive overload oriented. But if we just look at what happens, there's lots of people who don't strictly follow their logbook, and they do really pretty well. So there's also one set type for psychological reasons that is there to basically take advantage of the fact that it's sometimes, if you, for instance, want to bring up a weak muscle group, it's important to focus on how you're training that muscle and focus on your execution, focus on your mind-muscle connection, etc. And that is done better with lighter loads, generally speaking. That's what the research suggests. So that's where these pump sets come in. And that's something I think that carries over then to when you're using sort of your basic bare bones, meat and potatoes exercises as well. So there's so many things that are ingredients that can go into the recipe for what works. Progressive overload is one of those. Figuring out how to activate, target the muscle, have proper execution so that you're hitting the muscle and not accessory muscles or other muscles. So I put all those ingredients in and came up with one recipe that has flexibility based on how you recover, flexibility, and that's in terms of volume and frequency, and exercise selection. So auto-regulation is another important factor. So progressive overload, auto-regulation, what I said about targeting muscle groups, and then biological interindividuality based on what you can recover from in terms of both frequency and volume. So it's a system. It's not a canned, do this, you start off, you do these exercises, you do these sets and these reps, and it's just hope that you are someone who that's optimized for. You optimize the program for yourself, and you can also periodize it for yourself. You can periodize the volume, you can periodize the versions, go from the higher frequency to the lower frequency. You can go back and forth if you want. There's multiple, you can take this just like baking a cake. You go into a bakery, right? And you're going to see maybe bagels and croissants and cakes, torts and all sorts of things, but the basic ingredients are the same. So I took those basic ingredients, those basic principles of training and ideas, and put them together and produced a couple versions of Fortitude Training. But there's also a Family Man plan, sort of basically a third version that is in the book. If people actually buy the book, you don't see that in the overview sheets, but it's in the actual book itself. And you can take those same ingredients. This is the cool thing, and this is what I plan to do. Eventually, I'm sort of working on a revised version. Is you can take those ingredients and you can make all sorts of stuff. If you have baking powder and baking soda and yeast, etc., and sugar, you can make a cake, you can make a tort, you can make bagels. You just leave some of those things out if they don't fit your taste buds, fit your individual requirements in terms of frequency, growth. So go ahead.
Well, what it sounds like then is that yes, the answer is yes, you could still continue using a program like Fortitude as you age. You know, that
I actually made the program in part for myself because I was in my early 40s when I constructed it. I made it in particular for that reason, because you have to walking that tightrope of recovery is even more difficult, or can be, the older you get. You can't just mess up and destroy yourself and spring back 2 days later. You may be that may be the end of your blast. It's okay, I got to deload now. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have trained with that young buck. I tried to do too much that day, and now I'm screwed for the next week. Can't get out of bed, for 3 days in a row or whatever. Yeah. So absolutely. That's exactly who it works great for younger individuals too, because those ingredients work no matter what. But that having that flexibility, I think, is even more important the older you get, because you just can't blindly follow a program that just dictates what you do. You need to have that the flexibility, I think, needs to be in there. John Meadows said that, for instance, there are some days, and Arnold used to do this too. Sometimes they go in the gym, they just didn't have it, and they just go to the beach, take a day off. Dante said that, you're doing standard 2A DC split. If one day you go this is not going to work, just take that day off and pick back up where you left off, go from there. John said that too. He has flexibility in some of his programs where you can train 3 or 4 days a week and up to 6 days a week, depending on how you recover. So that's the thing that I think is really helpful from a psychological perspective, is that if you're executing a program properly, if you're being hardcore, then you're being intelligent enough to recognize when you need to pull back, when you need to do a lower volume tier, whether you do a higher volume tier, whether
It's
you
hard
need
to
to
figure
choose
out,
a
though.
harder exercise or a more isolating exercise. What do you the stretches? There's 3 different stretch types in there. One is just a flexibility stretch. It's like, okay, the muscle's whacked, man. I destroyed it today. I felt a little tender coming in today's workout. I just need to sort of stretch out. I don't need to create an extra stimulus, a stretch mediated hypertrophic stimulus by loading in the stretch position by doing a DC style extreme stretch. Today, I'm just going to do a flexibility stretch. Just want to maintain some range of motion. It feels good. So all of those things, like, you need to be able to do that. When your recovery abilities wane as you age, I think it becomes more important to have that built in the pro. So that's what the smart person does, right? That's executing. That's being a good soldier. That's being like, let's say take a special forces guy who's just an absolute badass, right? He doesn't just go in like the juggernaut and just start, if he's got some sort of offensive that he's in charge of, that he's part of, he doesn't just go in and just start shooting everything. That'll be the end of him, right? He needs to be smart, choose the right time, choose the right implementation of whatever resources he has available. Same thing with Fortitude Training. Like, let's say you come to the day for your pump sets. You don't get on like a Smith machine and do a pump sets, when your low back is already tweaked, or it feels like it's going to get tweaked. You pick something that is less stressful systematically to your nervous system. So that's the smart way to go about it. So you have to be crafty. And that's, I think, the thing that you have to do when you get older is you need to be, like John and I used to always say, we start our conversations. It's like, how's it going? Typical bodybuilders, you trained today. It's like, yep, trained, didn't get injured. I'm happy. It's like, okay, that's a win. I didn't hurt myself. And seriously, that was a big thing. It's just skirting the injury. So the Fortitude Training is partly set up to allow you to do that, to create a non-injurious stimulus, so to speak, by adjusting all those variables. So that's, I think, something that I don't know isn't out there as explicitly in other training programs, the way I built it in the Fortitude Training.
What about, like, just a kind of a general question with training as we age, rep ranges when we're using really high intensity sets? I've heard Dante say that for guys over a certain age, I think a guy in their 40s or older, that he would want to see like higher rep ranges, especially on things like a rest pause set. So we're not going for like 8 on the first part of the rest pause. We're going to be going for like I can't remember what he said, but it's really high, like 15 or 20.
20 to 30 at times.
Wow. And is that 20 to 30 for the full set or 20 to 30 for
the
the
total rest pause?
Yeah, okay.
Total. Yeah.
So can we still grow the same amount of muscle in that rep range as we could with the heavier weight for, like, 12 to 15 for the total reps?
So you can't say really anything with absolute certainty. I mean, with exercise science, it's not like I can say, the weight of a photon is this, right? It's not physics. There's a study with postmenopausal women that came out. We talked about here on the show a few months back now, where they trained them for 12 weeks using either a higher rep or a lower rep regime. And there were better responders. They had sort of high responders and low responders. And the high those groups were not equally. They were equally divided between the 2 rep ranges that were used. So some people grew better from high reps, some people grew better from low reps. Then they crossed them over. So they trained 12 reps that way, 12 weeks that way, with high reps or low reps, like 6 to 12, and then like 12 to 20. I can't remember the exact numbers that they used. And then they switched them over. And interestingly enough, the low responders, so either they didn't respond well with lower reps or they didn't respond well with high reps. They just happened to be in the lower half, the bottom 50th percentile. When they switched over to the other regime, they did better. So there's some indication, although you find on average, numerous studies have demonstrated that some people grow better from high reps versus low reps. This study was really kind of, it pointed out to what I've always been saying, or I've been saying for a long time, is I wish we could see more data represented so you can see the individual adaptations or responses. So this study showed that in those low responders, on average, they did better when they switched to the other rep range that they weren't using before. So some people will respond better to high reps. Some people respond better to low reps. And these were postmenopausal women. So that actually, these aren't men, but this is so we can, if we assume that isn't just a sex or gender-based difference, there are some people who can do better with high reps versus low reps. The problem is when you get older, especially if you've been training for a while. So let's say you're 45 and you've gotten to be a pretty strong dude over the years. And if you're doing DC training, that's pretty much going to be the case. You're going to be relative to your weight and whatever your substance, your assistance might allow, you're going to be strong, right? And the way I sort of view this is we're doing an unnatural act here with resistance training. We're trying to hack the muscle into growing, and we're getting incredibly strong in a way that isn't something our bodies probably evolved to do. So the nature of our connective tissue, the collagen proteins, the tendons, the ligaments, you see cartilage start breaking down. Like what you're doing after you've done that for decades is you're getting you're doing more than what the connective tissue was built to do, probably. So you're driving a Pinto and you got a Maserati engine in there, right? Your chassis isn't made to handle that. Your wheels aren't made to handle that, what have you. So you got to be careful, and that there's a wear and tear effect over the years. This is what Dante's talking about. So you get to someone whose training age is 20 because they started training at 20 and now they're 40 or 25. They're strong, and plus you've got wear and tear in those connective tissue. There's some free radical stress that accumulates, and you see things in the connective tissue that last in the collagen over the course of aging that makes they're more brittle. You don't have the same connective tissue mechanical properties that you had when you're younger. So you got to be careful with that, right? Yeah. The thing is, though, you can still potentially, if you can take your 15 rep max or your 20 rep max and take that from 200 to 250 pounds, all other things being equal, you're probably going to see muscle growth. Now, back to your original question, can I say that with absolute certainty? Well, maybe you're one of those people who just doesn't grow very well from higher reps because you're in that group for whatever reason. You still get some growth, but you're a low responder to high reps. You'd be a better responder to low reps. Well, you don't have much choice. You're kind of backed into a corner, right? Yeah. If you start doing sets of 5 and 6, or 6 to 8, the wear and tear in your connective tissue, and that's also something that's going to vary. So you got to be careful. You don't really have much of a choice at some point. You can't be although there are powerlifters who still, there's guys who are setting world records at the age of 80, and this sort of thing, and they're lifting, ridiculous loads. But most of us probably don't fall into that sort of extreme category. So yeah, but that's the thing. I built that into with Fortitude Training. So for instance, the heaviest loads you're using are on the loading sets, and the rep ranges there are 6 to 12. So let's just say you'll take volume tier 3 for people who know Fortitude Training, and you're doing thighs. So what you would do, let's say, is a squat, a knee extension, a squat, hamstring curl, and a squat, right? So if we just look at the loads and the reps you get for those squat sets, so there's a certain rest interval in between those exercises. The first set of squats and the second set of squats, you don't take to failure. You leave 1 or 2 reps in the tank. And the last one, you can take it to failure as long as you're safe, right? And you're not silly. So go to a 0 reps in reserve, or even take it to failure where you have a failure rep. Have to be careful. So if someone doesn't feel safe doing squats to failure, then don't do it. It's okay. You're still going to have a good stimulus. It's just practically speaking, if you go to failure on your squats the first set, and you got to get the bar back up and that whole thing, it just doesn't make any sense practically to do it. And also, you're getting a tremendous stimulus as well. So minimizing those failure reps is an important aspect, because that has a certain benefit to cost ratio on how much you recover when you train. There was a study that just came out not too long ago looking at hypertrophy in advanced trainees, 7 years. I forget the first author. Eric Helms was the second author. So this came out of his lab, or at least in part. And they compared training to failure. These individuals had 7 years on average of experience. This is pretty advanced. I've not seen a number higher. And they looked at the hypertrophy over the course of maybe 12 weeks. I can't remember the duration. And they went, I think, 1 to 2 reps in reserve versus failure. Okay. And what they observed, and this is something I've known for the longest time, like for decades, because I experienced this, is although you would think if they go to failure on every set, they're going to get more reps. Well, and have a higher volume because of that. Same load, more reps means higher volume, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they didn't, because the drop off in the number of reps they could get was greater when they went to failure. So the volume load was about the same, and the growth was about the same. So that points out that sort of underscores the idea that if you just take all those sets to failure, it just whacks your nervous system. Something happens. It could be also muscle related. Anyway. So we look back to this idea of you're doing squats, those 3 sets in that scenario, 6 to 12 reps. So if you are an older guy and you're going to stay at the top of that rep range, because you're not going to do sets of 6 on your squats, right?
Yeah.
So you go and let's say you do 12 reps, but you're leaving 2 reps in reserve. So that actually would be a 14 rep max. Yeah. That might be 75% of your 1 rep max. So that might be 300 pounds if you could squat 400, right? But if you start doing, let's say you do a set of 6 with just 1 rep in reserve, that's going to be more like 85%. So that's going to be more like 340 or something like that, whatever that works out to numerically. So that's substantially more weight. So if you keep your reps higher and you still got 1 or 2 reps in reserve, you're not even training with a 12 rep max at the start. You're training with a 14 rep max or 13 or 14 rep max. You stop at 12 reps. There is some fatigue. Then you go down from there. So your first set would be 300 pounds. You probably wouldn't use exactly 300 pounds because that's a weird way to load the bar. But then you might drop to 280 just to keep yourself at 12 reps. And then if you do your last set to failure with 12 reps, you might be at like 250 or something, right?
Yeah. So
you're always below 75% of your 1 rep max. That's not super heavy training. Now, if you're a young buck, right, and you're like, I want to get 6 reps, all 3 sets, that person might be at like 340 and then 315 and 300. Okay. So you compare 300, 280, and 250, whatever I said, versus 340, 315, and 300. That's a world of difference.
Absolutely.
That's over that 6 to 12 rep range. Those are your heavy sets. Those are the heaviest sets in Fortitude Training. So 75% of a 1 rep max isn't really super heavy, right? But it's still the heaviest thing you're doing. And if you can progress on that, the idea is that you would grow.
Okay.
Everyone's going to differ, right? And then the muscle rounds can also be, I won't go into that, can also choose the load and based on where you fail in the muscle round. And the pump sets are relatively lighter anyway. So those work well for older folks. So that's one of the things that I built in the system. I didn't just say has to be 6 to 8 reps. Because if you're 52, it's like playing with fire, baby. That's you're playing with fire, right?
It's a lot to ask.
Your discs are already, desiccated from the years of training, and a lot of people have low back issues. You're doing trying to do rack deads, for 6 reps, and you can't be training like Jordan Peters, when you're 55 years old or what have you.
Well, the way I see it too is it's safer to go to failure, let's say at 12, we'll say at 20 reps versus Absolutely. At 6 reps. Because if I'm going to fail at 6, the likelihood, let's say I get 6 reps, I go for a 7th, and then I fail. The likelihood of me getting that 7th rep is going to be a lot lower than if I can get 19 reps. You know what I mean? That's a different kind of failure.
Less dangerous failure rep.
Yeah. I probably already was feeling a good deal of fatigue by like rep 15, 16's getting harder, 17's really starting to slow down, 18 is a grinder, 19 is even more difficult than that, and then I go for that 20th rep and I don't get it, I miss, but man, it's still the overall load isn't going to be nearly as rough, and I'm still going to be able to control it back down where I need it to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The onset of form failure, which is a perfectly fine way to do it, where people are, and that's sort of a subjective thing. It's like, You don't have anyone like, with a protractor trying to measure the angle at your low back,
Right.
during your squats or whatever. If you're cutting your range of motion short and you're using low back. But the onset of form failure, you see this like on deadlifts, for instance. They're going just fine, and all of a sudden, like, boom, okay, their low back is rounding.
Yeah.
Whereas you're doing a higher rep set like that, and the loading sets wouldn't go as high as 20 reps, but you could be using a 20 rep max on a muscle round.
Okay.
That could be a load that you're using, and you're using 20 to 30 reps, something like that on pump sets too. But you would see that, you would notice, okay, my low back, I'm starting to have form failure here. And you would see that coming, and you'd be like, okay, this is the end of the set coming up, as opposed to, oh shit.
Yeah.
I mean, something you grind down that sixth rep or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just blind fury that you're putting into the thing, and you're trying to do anything you can, and you get a little overexcited, and the next thing you know, you've blown a disc. Like, shit just happened. So yeah. But there's a lot to say for that. It's too bad you can't, just train like a maniac all the time. It's I wrote an article, it's kind of old now, for Elite FTS, rust proofing the Iron Warrior.
Okay.
And it's about kind of things you can do as you get older, in terms of training and some other things as well, some supplements and the like. And one of the things that you kind of have to choose is like, okay, I can't go bonkers every set, but I can choose when I'm going to just let loose. And every once in a while, there'll be a good day. Every once in a while, there'll be a bad day. Fortitude Training has that built in. So muscle rounds, for instance, you can pick those. So a weight that you fail at your fourth rep, your fourth set, that would be much heavier. Or you could pick it where you fail in your sixth set. So let's say you come in this a day and you're doing a back thickness, so to speak, some sort of a rolling exercise. You might, on one day you're feeling good. I'm doing bent over rows, baby. I'm doing some, just like a meat potatoes exercise, because you feel good. You can do that, and you look in your logbook, and you've had muscle rounds where you are shooting to basically fail in that fourth set. So you would pick a load, and maybe you or even up that load, add a couple fives on each side, and try to beat what you've done previously, get equal number of reps. But another day you come in, and this is perfectly viable. This is part of the system. You come in, and it's like, you know what? I still going to do muscle rounds. It's what I have on the, but I'm going to drop down a volume tier even. And instead of doing, because you can choose those on the fly if you want to. Some people like to use the same exercises and beat them up week by week. But if you're not feeling it, then you choose a different exercise, and you choose a seated row or even a supported row, right? So your low back isn't in there. You don't have the mental focus to try to, really keep that low back arched and safe. And you choose a load based on what you've seen in your logbook, where you have kind of a running log of your muscle rounds, where you're going to fail in that sixth set and last time you got 3 reps in the sixth set of the muscle round. This time you just try to get all 4 reps and go beyond. So you still try to improve. You still try to progress based on what you've done previously. But you choose, on that day, your volume's less. You just drop down a volume tier because you auto-regulate in that sense. And you chose a different exercise, and you went with a lighter load, but you're still trying to beat a previous best, right? So that's a subtle thing. You're not going to, I don't know, there's maybe you could tease out information to support that idea in the research, but that's a subtle, intuitive, gut instinct type of training change that happens on the fly that, like, for instance, there was a guy, Angel Spazoff, who actually I do have a thought as to how the research could kind of validate that idea, and there's information out there. But he was Olympic weightlifting coach for Bulgaria, in like 80 and 84, something like that, where they won gold as a team. And he was the women's strength coach at University of Texas at Austin when I was there. And he would train all the women's sports, and he used Olympic lifts with them. And then he had a couple Olympic powerlifters. He actually worked with a guy named Desmond Hunt, who was an Olympic level triple jumper, who also did his PhD at University of Texas at Austin. And I would watch him work with guys, and he's got a PhD in sports science from Bulgaria, right? And the person would come in and he would write their program on that day. It's like, this is what you're going to do today. And he'd size them up. Like, he'd see how they walked in. He could see the brightness in their eyes, their posture. He'd watch them warm up and see how much snap they have, when they're doing their snatches or their cleans. and he just knew what they should do, how heavy they should go, how many sets they should do. And he auto-regulated as a coach with this almost a Chris Aceto like eye. Chris Aceto just sort of, it's like, okay, now you're having potatoes this meal. It's like, how the frig do you know that? Like, why do you think that? Well, the person, he knows his body, he knows his clients. So that's the thing you can do, because you know your body really as well as anyone else, or you have the potential to, if you're self-conscious in that way, and you can make all those choices, but still get a win out of it with it, which I think is good psychologically, and still progress. Yeah. So instead of like, I got to do bent over rows, and my low back isn't just really cut out for it this day for whatever reason. But I'm really not trying to target my lower back. It doesn't need any more extra stimulation. I'm trying to hit my lats, my spinal erectors, looking more upper back. You choose a supported row, and you pick an exercise done before it, and you progress. And at least you have, even if you have at least a measure of having progressed on that exercise. I think that's a good thing. And then you meter the total volume, meter the stimulus by doing a lower volume and doing fewer muscle rounds, fewer sets that day. So that's I think a wise way of training that you need to do. Back to that question of with older folks.
Right on.
So yeah.
How about this one? And by the way, guys, you're welcome to comment with questions during the live stream here. I'll make sure that we grab them as we get through these. How would you program an off-season split for bicep tricep growth? It's my weakest link.
First, I would look at, we've answered this question a million times.
It's been asked a million times. Arms, everybody wants to bring their arms up, right?
Yeah. Is everything else growing?
Yeah.
If you've been at it for 3-4 years, right, and your arms just are a relative weak point, they're probably going to stay a relative weak point. Some people would do site injections or SEOs or what have you for arms. Obviously, you can make them look ridiculous. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there to substantiate that.
Oh, yeah.
But look at whether everything else is growing. Because if we look at the big picture here, if you got an overall anabolic stimulus, you've got an anabolic situation, an anabolic milieu in your body, then your best muscle groups are probably going to grow better. Those are the ones that grow more easily. And you need to at least have that overall so that you're gaining muscle if you expect that the weaker muscle groups are going to grow. So that's the first and foremost thing. Then the next thing I would ask is, what have you been doing that doesn't seem to work, and what other options are available that you could be doing? So are you trying to do like sets of 6 for your arms? Are you trying to do, super high reps? What rep range have you tried to do? Or what haven't you done? Have you done an extreme stretching for arms? An extreme stretch is potentially something. If there's a stretch mediated hypertrophy avenue that's still available for growth, that would take advantage of that. Also, what exercises have you not done? So this is what Dante calls getting funky with it. I always try to give him credit for that. So you may need to set yourself up. So let's say you're on a incline bench, so you're leaning back and you're doing your bicep curls, so you have a stretch there, right? And whether you're getting an increase in sarcomerogenesis, an increase in length, or you're just getting a stronger stimulus because of the stretch. So figure out what exercises you haven't been doing. Figure out what rep ranges you haven't been doing,
right? And
maybe it's a matter of mixing those up. Figure out, first and foremost, make sure your body weight is going up in general, so you've got an overall anabolic. Don't expect your arms to grow when you're just eating at maintenance,
right?
And you're getting ready to go on the beach and trying to make your arms grow, and you're actually dropping body fat. Not going to happen. Anything probably just the opposite. Your arms are going to go first if it's your weak muscle group. And then, of course, some sort of progressive overload. If you've never done that, like a lot of guys just pump their arms. Some people, their arms will get big just from doing like deadlifts and shrugs and heavy pressing.
That was me. I saw my triceps grow really well when I got really strong as a presser. I saw my biceps and traps grow really well when I did a lot of deadlifts.
Very
Yeah.
common, super common.
I think this is a
So
common question, though, if I can jump in real quick here,
yeah, please.
because push-pull legs is so popular right now, and that people are focusing a lot on the chest, the back, the legs, and
Hmm.
they're hopefully getting some secondary work that's happening, as a result of those compound lifts in those arms. But I think when it's not always the case, that's why I think, though, that's where this question comes in. And I think
Yeah,
one of the reasons more and more people are asking it, of course, we're always vain. We want to have good arms, but I
sure.
do think there is kind of like a social aspect to overall the community maybe doing less direct arm training than we have in the past.
Yeah, and I was leaving that point for the end
Ah,
because there's all these other things that are important. Before everyone says, "Well, just focus on your arm training," right?
yeah,
So have an arm day. That
yeah,
makes total sense. If you don't have an
yeah,
arm day, probably should have an arm day. Um, how many sets are you doing? Like maybe you stick everything else as maintenance, and you just try to progress on your arms. And you set a day. You could even do like push pull legs arms. Do a 4-way split,
yes, yes, sir.
right? And have a day before and a day after your arms, and have your greatest caloric excess be divided between the meals before arm day and all day after arm day,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that's where you make sure you have the most anabolic environment. You could even almost be at caloric balance the rest of the week and have your whole caloric excess come on those days. So you do like a shitload day, right?
yeah,
Something like that, or skip load. Good day, the day you before you train arms, or the day you do train arms. Yeah, so that's totally viable. Training if your arms are not on, don't have their own day, train them first. That's part of what's there. What's part of doing that is that you're fresh. You have an arm day, then they're fresh. They're not an afterthought. It's like,
yeah,
oh, I just trained back. I just did. I mean, anyone can. You want to find this out for yourself. Do something like DC training. Let's say you do a 3-way split.
right.
Dante has you do biceps first. If you're doing
Okay.
2-way split, you train biceps on leg days. You still biceps are not going to. It's not going to be if you're training your back correctly. Biceps are not. They're almost never going to limit how well you can hit your back.
Yeah,
Right? It just doesn't get in the way. But people just put biceps at the end. You compare what you could do if you did biceps first, with what you could get if you did biceps at the end, and the load is just not the same.
yeah,
Right? It's just not there, and your nervous system's also shot. Right? So you can't train as hard. And arms are just like you're not going to go, make giant jumps in weight and or reps with arms typically.
no, yeah,
You got to just inch forward, man. You got to inch forward. Um, so, yeah, definitely orient your training split and your training preference towards focusing on arms. Make sure there's plenty of recovery. Make sure there's no fatigue in the arms when so you can train them directly. What else am I missing? The stretching aspect. What I like in Fortitude Training, the thing that I if people are following that regime, is you've got these pump sets too,
Mm.
and the pump sets. Sometimes you got to just like with calves, you've just got to hammer if you're someone whose arms don't get sore typically,
Mm-hmm.
you just got to hammer them. So you could make pump sets absolutely ridiculously difficult.
Yeah,
So by just doing pulse reps at the end. So you might do like a reverse 21, right? And
yep,
then, come to the top and just do like a DC style pulsing negative all the way down until you can't move your arms anymore.
yeah,
I think Dorian Yates does this in one of the videos where he's doing side laterals, like, and he's got, normal range of motion. He's going up fairly high. And then at the end, he's just doing these partials in the lengthened position. He can't get any higher. He doesn't have the muscle strength anymore to do that. You can do that. You can do it with hamstrings too. John used to do that in some of his programs. You do lying hamstring curls or even seated. And then you can't get any more reps. And then you just do like pulses. And then in the extended position, you can do like 30 of those. It burns like a mofo, right?
oh yeah, it does.
And that would be a stretch mediated hypertrophy type of thing. So you can do that with arms. So have those types of stimuli built in, but also make sure you're progressing. So you can get so focused on, I want to increase how much I destroy myself, how much torture I produce on my arm training.
Right.
But in the meantime, you could actually be regressing. So you start off and you can do dumbbell curls with the 50s for 10. And then 2 months later, if you're only able to get 7 reps with those, you went the wrong way. You may have totally pummeled your arms, but you didn't recover from that stimulus. So you can increase the stimulus, and as long as the recovery is there, that would be the way to go. But you still need to have some monitoring. That's the thing with arms is people don't necessarily write down what their arm workouts were. They just go in and pump them out.
Right.
But if it ain't been working, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting, right? So you're going to have to do something different. And I'd almost guarantee you, if you can go from 35 pounds for sets of 10 dumbbell curls to 50s, it's going to be visible in your arms if you've been training for several years and you're past most of the neural gains.
Yeah, I noticed that for me, I did need to go heavier with arms.
And
it's interesting because a lot of the guys who have good arms will tell you, you don't need to train arms real heavy, okay?
Because they have good arms, though.
Well, I work out with those guys, and their version of not real heavy was still heavier than what my version of not real heavy was. You know what I'm saying? And so I realized, I was like, okay, so why don't I work up to the point where I'm comfortable with your version of not real heavy? And I found that made a difference.
Yeah.
I think Casey might still be with us. He worked with me for a month on training, and we one of the things we did, arms were his goal. Guy has good development in his chest, great legs, like really solid legs, good development in his back. Arms were what was lagging. And we temporarily increased the frequency on his arms. So we did like a chest and tries, back and buys, and then later in the week we did a full arm day. We split the volume up, but that was something that I really started thinking about that by all our conversations, thinking about frequency. Frequency was something I didn't think about a decade ago. We all did, one time body part, per week. Every body part was hit once per week, the bro split. And I discovered that for me then, because that's what I did for so long, changing the frequency made a big difference. So we increased that frequency with the idea, though, of it being, hey, listen, we're not going to always have the high frequency. Like we kind of did like a little bit of an overreaching, like we really loaded it up. And this is going to be a temporary thing. Let's just do this for a month. Let's just do this for 6 weeks, and then let's pull that back some. Yeah,
that's brilliant. The frequency is that kind of missing ingredient. That I think that's why I made Fortitude. I intentionally shifted Fortitude Training towards being a higher frequency regime, knowing that that's not necessarily going to fit everyone. I could have made like a ton of versions of Fortitude Training, and those can easily be fashioned from what I have. But I wanted to I wanted to create something that would kind of target a higher those who do better with higher frequency, just to make that sort of an option. That's sort of you open a restaurant and you can't serve everybody, right? You're Italian, you're Chinese, what have you.
Yeah.
So I opened a high frequency restaurant, kind of knowing that that's gonna, because it wasn't like, how come there's not a good Greek restaurant in my town? It's like, well, how come there's not a good high frequency program? We had DC training, and Fortitude Training would sort of kind of fill that gap. And one important quote to what you said about training heavier. Yeah, 100-pound dumbbell curls in your face. Remember that?
No, it's on the surface of my brain.
Evan Levroni.
He said Maryland that. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
He goes. He looks at the camera and he says that real in your face.
Yeah. Oh man, he had the craziest arms too. He really did.
His arms were just absolutely wackadoodle, man. So and he's doing 100-pound dumbbell curls. So what's that tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the thing, man. I had lighter weights and I'm like, I don't need to go real heavy. Everybody's telling me you don't need to go heavy on arms. But then I look and I'm like, but wait, your version of real heavy is definitely a lot heavier than my version of not real heavy, Yeah.
There is an association between muscle strength and muscle size.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not perfectly 1-to-1, especially when you're adding the nervous system in there. The thing with training heavy that a lot of people run into is tendonitis.
Yeah.
It's difficult so you have to be really careful with that. Just a little trick that I found over the years, not that you just want to keep ignoring the tendonitis, but it tends to be worsened training in the lengthened position. So doing like preacher curls, for instance. Sometimes when I'm working through one of the umpteen million times I've had tendonitis, biceps tendonitis, I would actually neglect that stretch position. I was able to still train the biceps, do something, and without having the exacerbating the pain. So it wasn't like I was just training through the pain. I realized that, I could do that and not make it worse. I didn't have any pain when I stayed out of that lengthened position.
Yeah.
So
I'd be curious, everybody who is hanging out with us, I'm going to take like a mini poll here right now. How many of you guys feel like your arms are lagging? I want to know. There's going to be that one random guy who's just got crazy arms, but I have a feeling that everybody else is going to be like, yeah, I need, we all feel like we need more arms. Hey, on the note of that, the tendonitis, we did get a related question, and it's from Mr. No Triceps was his name. Can you please give some suggestions regarding aching elbows from training? You already gave us a good one. I have a whole spiel on this, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say on it, Scott. I might pick something else up new.
So first, you got to figure out what we're talking about here. So we're talking about the elbow joint. Are we talking about golfer's elbow? Are we talking about tennis elbow? Are we talking about biceps tendonitis? Are we talking about the brachioradialis being painful?
Yeah. I'm just going to put up people's. I'm putting up everybody's arm comments as we go.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We're going to see who's got muscle dysmorphia. Like basically, you're going to see. So you got to figure out what is causing the elbows to hurt. A lot of times people mean triceps tendonitis.
Yeah.
But don't know exactly that's what he means. So first and foremost, I'd figure out what is causing the pain, which exercises it is, right? So there's certain exercises that for whatever reason, biomechanically, neurologically, neuromechanical matching, what have you, you end up activating the triceps in a way that's causing that pain, right? Like I can't, for instance, skull crushers, I couldn't do those even when I was a teenager. They just cause like anytime I get to any type of reasonable weight, I've just had pain. I haven't trained with those since I was probably 14 or something like that. That's just a complete no-go for me.
Was that, how are you doing them? Like with a bar, cambered bar, what?
An easy curl bar.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything lying on your back, trying to bring the dumbbells down, the barbell down there.
You ever use dumbbells? Because I got it terribly with a bar, but I found if I use dumbbells, my elbows could track the way they wanted to.
Yeah, look, so whether you let your elbows keep them inside or let them outside, I have tried that, but it still creates the pain. Like even with lightweight, just for me, whatever reason. Yeah. But I can do tricep press downs, and I mean I've gotten strong enough with tricep press downs where I would have to put a dip belt on to hold myself down in place.
No kidding.
Yeah. I mean, I've like a stack plus a 45 on the stack, that kind of thing. And I'm pushing down, I'm like floating all over the place because I'm exerting so much force. And I could go really heavy on those and be just fine. So hold on just a sec. Jesse, 9.
Uh-oh.
9. Thank you. I got a new puppy. Yeah. Hey, 9. Danke. Hold on. Let me get her a little treat. And I'll be able to introduce her at the end. Hold on a sec.
All right. I'll share with you guys some thoughts while Scott's doing that. So if we are dealing with tendonitis in the elbow, he's back already. I was gonna fill and share my thoughts, but
go ahead, please.
Well, I was gonna say though, Scott, that so if we are dealing with tendonitis at the elbow, a lot of times we're dealing with like a repetitive use inflammation. Like if we're dealing with a tennis elbow, golf elbow, and the number one thing that I've learned from this, because I had to go to physical therapy for it because it got so bad I couldn't even like brush my teeth with my right arm.
What did you have?
I had tennis elbow.
Okay.
And then later in life, I got golf elbow. And then I got tennis elbow again. And then I got tennis elbow again. Then I got tennis elbow again after that. So I haven't learned my lesson. But from the way I've understood this is a lot of those issues relate to overuse of the grip. If you're trying to grip something too tight, everything, kind of the beautiful thing about the hand is that it's a strong tool, but it's intricate. And because the things that control it are all from like the wrist to the elbow. So if you're overusing that grip, you'll end up straining things, further up, those tendons further up. And one of the problems with inflammation in that connective tissue is it doesn't get as good a blood flow. So you have this kind of this strain, we could go as far as called an injury when it gets bad enough, and it gets inflamed, but it's difficult for that blood to get out. So you have all this blood that's rushing in and it's inflaming it. But it becomes like a traffic jam, basically. That blood flow can't get out. It's trying to carry in, growth peptides and whatever else to help new blood, basically, to aid in recovery while carrying away waste materials. But it's basically getting stuck there. And then we go in the gym and we keep making it worse and worse and worse. So the first practical thing that I've done is I've had to be real mindful of how much I'm using my grip. And so I've tried to use my lifting straps to try to take, God forbid I actually took time off the gym, right? So instead, I'd use lifting straps and strap up for literally everything just to take that strain off. Even if I was doing like, a dumbbell press, I'll strap up in those cases to pick the dumbbells up.
Tearing a hole in my leather couch.
Go get it. I'll pick those straps. I'll pick the dumbbells up using straps just so that I don't have to grab the handles quite as hard to get them in position. And once I sit down, I loosen them up before I kick them up to do my presses. So that's one thing. From what I've understood, one of the worst movements you can do is holding a weight with your palm facing down. Like this position, like a front delt raise, is one of the absolute worst positions to put strain on that tennis elbow. So that's one, is try to relieve what's happening, maybe switch to machines, try not to grip so hard. And then number two is get that inflammation down through ice. Icing as frequently as you possibly can. And massage can be helpful. A topical NSAID, like what's that stuff called? Voltaren can be helpful, as well as, an oral NSAID like Advil. But I mean, obviously you got to be careful because that's also going to relieve the pain, and we don't want you to have like a false sense of actually having recovered. So anyway, all those things, massage therapy, you can do massage yourself. You can dig into those tendons and you can find that spot. And as you kind of break that up, you're bringing fresh blood flow in and carrying waste materials away. And then physical therapy. If you go on YouTube, you can find every physical therapy, exercise there is to better understand how to recover this. Things like the flossing, things like the old school movements, like the wrist curls with a band, having that forearm supported. Heck, I even used the one where you have to roll a rope up a bar. Do you know what you have like a, you know what I'm talking about, Scott? You got that bar with a rope on it and a little weight on the end, maybe a 2.5 pound plate, 5 pound plate, rolling that up and then letting it back down. All those things to help strengthen the area back up. If you use those things in conjunction between rest, reduce the inflammation, and then strengthen the grip and strengthen the area that's weak, that's kind of going to be the answer. But it's something that it takes time. So anyway, that's my spiel.
The only thing I would add to that, I would push back on the notion of ice. That's being really strongly reconsidered in the physical therapy world.
Is it really?
Ice. Yeah. Yeah, because it reduces blood flow, it reduces inflammation, and some of that inflammation is part of the natural healing process. So the rest, ice, compression, elevation, the ice part of that in particular, there's numerous articles you can find. There's actually in the scientific literature too, trying to look at where that comes from. It helps with pain for sure. But that's a whole other topic that I'll leave people to kind of look into.
No kidding. But I mean,
yeah.
What about like, so, and obviously you know more about this than me, and I'm going off of, what I have done for years. Doesn't the ice reduce inflammation or reduce the blood flow? But then after you remove it, isn't blood rushing in to speed that process back up?
I don't know that you get a hyperemic effect
when
you remove the ice.
Okay.
The main issue there was it somehow that idea of ice got entered into the dogma, and the data the data just doesn't exist to support its use in the way that we just sort of came to presume it did.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Chinese medicine, for instance, you'd never use ice. it's not something you would do. You'd promote blood flow.
So would you use heat then, or
you would tend to use, heat would be used for sure.
Okay.
That will definitely cause increased blood flow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, ice is it's gonna reduce the pain if you can't sleep at night or what have you. Ice will it's definitely a great sort of emergency medicine as far as that goes. But repeatedly using ice, like, so I know people who like the ice every time after they train.
Yeah.
That's not something I would suggest someone do. And even like I've treated tennis elbow and golfer's elbow using Chinese medicine before, and like I had one guy who had it for months and months, and I did one session of 20 on, it was gone.
What's
And
that?
Chinese body work.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So you can treat it really effectively.
One session.
Like, it was just amazing. But he was always a responder. Everything I did with him worked really, really well. He actually was funny because sorry, she's eating my couch again, man.
Oh,
what she's doing? She's got a hole. Hold on just a second.
No, stop her.
Hey, 9, let's toss to me.
We can't have Scott getting his couch eaten by his new puppy. I had my dog tore a hole in the wall when she was a puppy, and it was a mess. She was left alone for too long. I was at work, and I had her in the kitchen because I didn't want her to get messing up anything with the furniture. And she was a puppy, and she kind of claw chewed this big patch. Didn't go all the way through the drywall, but she sure as hell messed it up. Oh, JT's girlfriend is a Chinese medicine doctor.
Okay, problem solved.
Acupuncturist. Hey.
Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, so I'm a acupuncture physician in Florida is actually the title that I hold with my license. So
okay.
Anyway, Chinese medicine doctor, same thing. Yeah, there was actually a physician in the gym. This is my buddy Mike Gustafson. He might even be listening. And this doctor I think he was an orthopedist or a retired orthopedist. And Mike he would come in, and Mike would chat with every once in a while. And one day he told the doctor that that I treated him, and it went away. And he's like, "It's impossible." It's like that. I don't believe you. It's like, well, it worked. He just completely said, "No, it didn't happen." It's like, no, it can't be. It's like,
you're
okay.
kidding.
Well, yeah, he just completely negated the idea, couldn't take it on board. So anyway, yeah, all those things definitely, I'm down with, like, those being possibilities. It's just the first thing I always suggest is stop doing the shit that makes it hurt.
Yeah,
figure out what that is. So like for you, the grip thing, right? That's part of it. You just have to like train your back and your chest from the elbows.
Yeah, or watch like the death grip, man. I know that there's been times that I've even just gripped a dumbbell curl or a barbell curl as hard as I absolutely could. And you sometimes hear that advice. You want to grip that bar as hard as you can because it's going to train your forearms. Not me. It's going to train my elbow to hurt.
No. Yeah. And that's, the lateral epicondylitis, the tennis elbow, those are the wrist extensors.
Yeah.
So if you're gripping really hard and your wrist flexors and your finger flexors are activated and it's excessive, you're going to also have some in the antagonistic muscles, the extensors that go to your epicondyle here, which is where you have the pain. Those are going to be activated, so that those tendons are going to be stressed. So yeah, definitely. And then if you do that, what you said, loosen your grip or use straps, and the pain's gone. Well, holy smokes, that's going to be a good thing. But if you do that and the pain is still there and you train through it, well, chances are the injury will stay.
I've got one more question on the ice. So Tanya Miller, what's up, Tanya? I just got to meet her at the Arnold, and she's going over to the UK Arnold now. She said ice is still considered useful in the first day that an injury occurs, then heat after that. So my understanding has been in an acute issue, so that you can kind of hack that inflammatory process. So are you saying the first 24 hours, is it still okay to use?
Yeah, like I said, like you can't sleep at night, you've got an acute thing. If you want to reduce the pain and the inflammation, it absolutely 100% does that.
Okay, so you're not saying ice ever.
As a Chinese medical practitioner, there are other topicals that you can use that will serve that same purpose. Because thousands of years when the medicine was being developed, you couldn't, unless you were maybe in northern China, it was the right time of the year, you couldn't run out and find some snow, and people didn't have ice cubes available to them,
and they didn't have any TB 500 on hand.
Yeah, none of that stuff was there. So, but they had herbs and liniments that could be made. So yeah, ice without a doubt, it could, like an emergency medicine. That's basically what I think. Those are the words I use.
Okay.
So yeah, it definitely has an anti-inflammatory effect. It limits blood flow, but using that a regular course of that in the course of treating is not something that I would suggest. Now,
Okay.
some other practitioner may have. There may be a situation where someone you kind of drop the ball and you do something, and all of a sudden, oh shit, it hurts way too much again.
Yeah.
And you need to use it again because you basically have another acute injury. But this is a topic that's huge, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it isn't viewed in the way that it once was, where a steady diet of ice over the course of days following an injury would be something that is recommended, at least by all physical therapists. I know that for sure.
Okay.
But it's still a point of contention. I think you can find entire podcasts on this, issue of ice.
Consider me interested then in that case.
Yeah,
I want to
it's
learn
fascinating
more.
stuff. It's a really fascinating, from what I understand, it's a really fascinating instance of dogma coming into existence without being able to find the actual origins of the dogma. It's like there's origins with it, but where's the original information to support this idea? Wasn't terribly well substantiated.
How about this one? How do we distinguish the line between junk volume and pushing our workout?
Through trial and error, like most things. So, yeah, if there are a couple things, like during the workout, a lot of guys, will say, I lose my pump, right? There's something there that has to do with probably glycogen being depleted. So in this particular case, your volume or your performance is going to go down. If with whatever workout structure you have, whatever split you're following, you're not making progress in the gym in terms of your performance, then chances are, unless you're just way underdoing it, but if you're doing if you're on the high end volume wise, then chances are you're probably got some junk volume in there. Regardless of the pump, if you feel like this is an auto-regulatory thing, that it's just not in you to do that, right? That might be the case if you're in prep, right? And you don't feel like you have it in you from the first set on, like it all feels rough, right? But if you sense that you're doing too much, I can tell this, like when I've trained, for instance, when I was training with Derek Oslin a few years back, we were doing mountain dog training, I knew that I was doing too much. I just had fun training. Like I'm just gonna have fun. I know these workouts are not
you knew while it was
all
happening.
optimal.
Yeah.
I knew before I went into it, and I had to have a huge intro workout, a huge post workout meal, and I had to make sure everything else that I could possibly was on point just to survive.
Yeah,
I was gaining weight at a pretty rapid pace too, because I was eating those were the cereal gains days.
Yeah. You were like his Oscar Arden, where Oscar was keeping up with Kai. You know what I mean? Remember that?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Bingo. Exactamundo. So yeah, the junk volume would be, and the thing is you don't know until you've tested. So we have this sort of hormesis curve, this dynamic equilibrium, more sets means better results up to some point, and then you go beyond that. So you may actually still be progressing and say, well, there's no junk volume there. Well, there could be some, depends on how you define junk volume. There could be some excessive volume that pushes you beyond what's optimal for you. And the way to know that would be to reduce your volume and maybe let's say you're doing 12 sets a week and you're still making progress. What if you drop down to 6 sets a week? Right? Maybe you leap forward. That could be a bunch of things. It could be that you've overreached for a while and now you're sort of harnessing the gains that you set in place because you dropped your volume down. But you'll have to do just trial and error to see. And I made this mistake, I think, for decades of training more than was optimal.
Sure. I think we all have,
Yeah. Yeah. Because you want to, at the end of the day, you want to have that feeling like there was no stone unturned. I did everything I possibly could.
Yeah.
So you'll have to go down to, in many cases, down to a volume that you may sense is below enough, and then find out if that's the case, right? But a lot of people grow really well when they don't get hardly any muscle soreness at all.
Yeah.
And for many people who are relying on muscle soreness to have the sense that they did something that was productive, they never get to that place. So that would be one concrete way. It's like, okay, train with as little volume or as much volume or as the most amount of volume as you can, so that you don't have really any substantial muscle soreness. You maybe always have a little bit of tenderness, but you have absolutely no muscle soreness noticeable going into your next workout, or at least like some of the, maybe if you do a deep stretch, but there's nothing there at all. So for some people, for instance, for me, it would be a completely different sense of muscle soreness going into those workouts, and see what happens when you do that. A lot of people will go really well from doing that. So junk volume, like it's sort of portrayed as if, you have some exact optimal amount, and then anything beyond that is junk. Well, the exact optimal depend on all the other things in your lifestyle and your physiology that contribute to your recovery state. And that could be the previous weeks of training. That could be your diet, where you are off season, pre-contest. That could be the PEDs that you're using. That could be the stress that you have, a bunch of things. So your optimal, it's always jumping around, right? So the junk volume you have is also going to be bouncing around. One day doing volume tier 3 for Fortitude Training could be really good. That could be great. And then a week later, when, your daughter was in the hospital all night long, vomiting, and you didn't sleep the night before, and you're stressed out because work is, crazy, and you go into the gym and you're like, oh God, man, I don't know if I will want to train today. Volume tier 3 is not appropriate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So junk volume on that particular day would be anything above volume tier 1, perhaps. So yeah, that's the junk volume thing. It's a useful concept, but it's a very difficult. You can't really measure that concretely because it relates to basically being able to tell the future in terms of your adaptation, but I think acutely you can know by your soreness. I do this perceived recovery scale. It's in my book. It's on my website, where people sort of write down where they perceive their overall recovery to be. You could do the same thing for a muscle. Do a subjective 0 to 10 rating on a muscle. Where do you perceive its recovery to be? Stuff like I mentioned this a million times. You walk into the gym, and when you take that first 45-pound bar off the weight tree or off the post, and you pick it, you flip it around like a tiddlywink and put it on the bar, right? Or is it like, oh shit, your elbows are kind of sore, and you're like, oh man, the 45 felt like 95, right?
Yeah.
Those things will tell you. Like some days you're like, man, everything feels like the first warm-up set feels light. Those are days when you have a little more. Yeah, those are awesome, right? It's like, okay, it's fucking go time, baby. Time to rip into it. So your junk volume for those days, would be beyond a much higher number of sets or a much higher way of training. So in terms of the things I mentioned with Fortitude Training, much higher neurological stress exercise selection. So bent over rows versus seated rows or supported rows. So yeah, junk volume it's volume, but it's a function of all those things I mentioned in terms of recovery state, and also a function of probably what exercises you choose. So you could do 6 sets, 3 sets each of 2 less neurological, less accessory muscle activating exercises, like a seated. Let's compare bent over rows and chins versus a supported row and like a leverage pull down of some sort where you're really locked in. Those will have different effects on your recovery state, your recoverability afterwards.
For sure.
So the number of junk volume sets that you might be accruing if you went beyond those 6 sets is going to differ. If you do 6 sets of bent over rows and 6 sets of chins, 4 of those might have been junk, but maybe you can get away with 6 and 6 on those other 2 exercises. So yeah, that's a difficult question. And that's sort of that's the cool part about training and trying to learn yourself, know thyself, and you're different every day.
Yeah.
We're always changing. Your body's always changing. Everything's always in a state of flux. So
I got one more for you, Scott. If you
Okay.
if your puppy will let you, if you're
Yeah, she's sorry. I'm not trying to be distracted, but yeah,
no.
she's got every toy. She's gone through all the toys. She's gone
All
through.
right.
She's destroyed a couple things.
So we talked a lot about training, the nutrition question, intra workout nutrition to complement so we can get the best recovery possible. Thoughts on new post workout products like Carbolin or Vitargo cornstarch versus old dextrose for insulin spikes. All right, I feel real old now because these are all old. These are at this point. These are all old and older carbs. That's the way I see them.
Yeah.
But I know what he means though. Yeah.
So, like, see, remember how this worked out. So there's 2 Vitargo studies. One produced faster rates of glycogen storage, I believe, and another one produced faster rates of gastric emptying.
Okay.
And if you look up Vitargo, it's a patent,
Yeah.
and the patent is based on using a variety of carbohydrate sources, rice and corn and maybe wheat. There's maybe 5 that they mention, and then putting it through a process. So what you start with will change what you end up with. And in those 2 studies, they used Vitargo that was barley is one of them. That I remember now, and the other one might be wheat. But they use Vitargo based on different starting materials. So you're going to end up with a different branching pattern of the carbohydrate, and you got a different product basically. Didn't make the same measurements. So you find different things, and I think compared to a glucose, they may have used a maltodextrin control in one and a glucose in the other.
Yeah.
So highly branched cyclic dextrins from True Nutrition.
Yes,
that's basically what we're talking about, is high molecular weight carbohydrates. So you will find different results on average depending on, for instance, the 2 different Vitargo studies that I'm aware of.
Okay.
There may be some more that have come out. Also, waxy maize, for instance, that tends to be a low glycemic index product. But there are tons of different grades of waxy maize and different levels of processing. Like when waxy maize first came out, we did a little pseudo study on intense muscle, and people used glucometers to measure their glucose measurements, and people were having like literally no glucose spike at all. It was like going from 90 to 100. It was like, or 110. It was just barely. So it was a very slowly absorbed carbohydrate. There's a study with, I believe, swimming rats or mice, swimming rodents, and with performance enhancement. And there's also a study with humans on faster gastric emptying and less flatulence from highly branched cyclic dextrins. So there is some advantages. This is why people want to take those if you're going to use it as an intra-workout. The thing is, there's a study I have in my Why You Don't Look Like a Pro presentation. And if you compare maltodextrin and white bread, for instance, and look at the glycemic responses, I've probably talked about this before here. I think I have. It's not the same for everyone. It's not that you see a consistently higher glycemic index from one carbohydrate source versus the other. It's all over the place. In some cases, you don't even see a smooth curve where it goes up. You can get like a bimodal curve that presents itself. And it's not even a symmetric bimodal curve. It's just sort of like some sort of a crazy roller coaster. And so some people will have a higher glucose peak with one carb source versus another. I presume it's probably the case with those different versions of Vitargo, whichever one they're coming out with now. So look at the researchers. Stevens, I think, was the first author in one of those studies. I can't remember. If someone wants, they can message me on Instagram and I'll send them the studies with Vitargo. So everyone's going to be different as far as those things. So the highly branched cyclic dextrins, I think they do reliably produce less bloating than like glucose or dextrose. That's for sure. Maltodextrin, just anecdotally, empirically, seems to be a little bit better. It has a pretty high glycemic index for most people. So the thing is, and this has been demonstrated at least in cyclists who use a carbohydrate source, during exercise, cycling exercise, is that you will, over the course of time, your GI will adapt to whatever gastric disturbances you might typically have from a carbohydrate source. So you can get used to a carbohydrate source.
Oh, no kidding.
And I would not be surprised whatsoever if, because for instance, we know based on your diet, your microbiome will change. Your microbiome will predict your glycemic index responses to a given meal. So if you change your diet, let's say you add a particular carb source into your intra workout, it's at least one thing that potentially change your microbiome, and then your microbiome will then change your glucose responses to a given test meal. In one particular study demonstrated this. So your GI tract will adapt. What's going on there in terms of changes in glucose transporter populations or some other physical manifestation in your stomach or your small intestine, or whether it's your microbiome that's also involved here somehow, because that's a downstream controller, so to speak, of gastric movement. All sorts of things can change. So only way really to know if you're worried about your glucose peak or your glycemic index is to make a measurement. And was the question about intra-workout or just in general? I can't remember.
It was about the more complex carbs or the intra-workout powders versus just simple dextrose.
Yeah, that's a high molecular weight carbohydrates and osmolality issue. So you get more gastric emptying is the rate limiter for getting the glucose into your system. So if you have high molecular weight, basically some glucose polymers strung together in whatever branching pattern that they have there, you can get, for each molecule, you can get 10 glucose molecules for each polymer. Sorry, you can get 10 glucose molecules in your small intestine. So you can get glucose in your small intestine out of the stomach more rapidly with the high molecular weight carbohydrate sources. The more you can get into the small intestine, then that can get absorbed more rapidly, more easily. So if you have glucose or dextrose, same thing. You just tend to have a stronger osmotic effect relative to the number of glucose molecules that you have there, glucose moieties that you have there. So you end up with more bloating, you need to drink more water, et cetera, and potentially slower gastric emptying and more flatulence and all that kind of stuff too. So
I can tell you out of my personal experience that I can drink highly branched cyclic dextrin, and by the time I'm done training, I am hungry, my stomach feels empty, and I'm ready to accept that next meal. Versus when in the past, when I would use maltodextrin or just dextrose, it would leave me feeling fuller, and it would take me a longer period of time before I was ready to eat again.
It can be people get really, sometimes the difference is just like yours. That's a big difference. Some people they get so bloated, they can't even train.
Yeah.
And other people are just fine with it. So here's the thing, like, not that you want to like intentionally do things that create bloating, but let's say that you're dieting down and you're trying to get off the last couple percentage body fat, right? And you've been using in the off season, use highly branched cyclic dextrin, some high molecular weight carbohydrate source, and because you're pushing your calories and you want to get the intra workout in and then be ready for a meal and actually be hungry, right? Or at least be more ready for the meal. Well, then say you're making your own blend from True Nutrition, right? And you got your own carbohydrates coming in. And maybe at some point in time when you start your diet or when your calories are starting to get low, where you're starting to feel hungry on a more regular basis, you switch from half HBCDs to half dextrose. And then maybe you get 6 weeks out and now you keep that intra-workout the same, right? So those calories are pretty much the same. You're going to change how much is getting in the bloodstream, those sorts of things. But you have this gastric filling effect or a slower gastric emptying effect is probably a better way to say it, from the dextrose. You're not as hungry afterwards. And if you relieve hunger, I think that's just a general good thing. When you're sitting there all stressed out because you're hungry, it's not good for holding on the muscle mass, not good for your mental health. So you can actually use that as a way to make sure you still maintain that intra workout, but then don't have that, oh my gosh, I'm just starving now after my workout, because you're using a slower absorbing glucose source.
Yeah.
Protein will do that too. This is why, you could add fats as well. But if you're looking at your caloric intake, and you just can't just throw fats in there willy nilly because you run into calorie issues, that's one way you can shift your carbohydrate source as you diet down closer to a show to maintain fullness. So like one of the worst things is to be in your workout and be starving at the same time, which is really weird. But that happens when you get really lean. It's like, oh man, you start off starving. So it's a nice lease to like take that intra-workout in just before you start, and at least not be hungry, for that hour and a half of your workout.
Yeah.
And the dextrose is going to be a better carb source to help with that, because gastric filling does send a signal to your brain.
So one thing I've noticed is one of the newer trends in supplements is that people or companies aren't necessarily offering a pure highly branched cyclic dextrin product. You're getting, a lot of times it's like 10 grams of highly branched cyclic dextrin along with dextrose or along with a patented carb, but the product ends up costing the same amount as, and here's the deal, is that highly branched cyclic dextrin, the overhead on it is really high. The profit margin is really low. From what I understand, it's a product that's really hard to make any money off of. So in the past, I think that a lot of companies had offered it just because they wanted to have like an intra-workout product. But I think the new trend is to reduce the amount that they put in the product, make up for it with a cheaper carb source, and then still charge the same, basically what the same price would be to go. And I here's the thing, this is exactly one of the reasons that I asked True Nutrition to work with us and advertise with us, is because they're a company that I really believe in. So I just get the straight up highly branched cyclic dextrin from them, mix my EAA with it. And if I want dextrose, I can then add that in at the ratio that I want, versus paying for a tub that you're only getting 10, 15 grams of highly branched cyclic dextrin instead of 25,
Yeah. The thing like with supplements is, for many people, just in general, a lot of what is probably producing whatever they're noticing is placebo effect. And that's a function of their expectancies. That's a function of how the things are marketed.
Yeah.
And you have to have something that's marketable. It's like, it's got all the bells and whistles, right?
Yeah.
This is why I buy it. So people aren't going to, a lot of times, notice, oh my gosh, I have this great ergogenic effect from my intra-workout. People will notice that sometimes if they leave an intra-workout out, that it's absent and they don't seem to be able to perform as well. That's just an anecdotal thing that I've heard many times from people. They go to travel or whatever, and it's like, oh shit, I didn't bring my intra-workout with me. I just grabbed a workout. And I'm like, it was just for shit. It was awful. Yeah. Even when they're in a good motivating place, it's not like I got, I'm in the hotel gym and it sucks. So yeah, you've got a marketplace that's not necessarily marketing per se on producing the best product for you in terms of an ergogenic effect or an anabolic effect, or metering your blood glucose or what have you. It's based on what are the going trends on what's the best carbohydrate, right? Yeah. And if you want good gastric emptying and you need that because you're taking in a massive amount of carbs, then highly branched cyclic dextrin might be okay. But if you only want to take in like a small amount because you're dieting, and you want to have a slower movement of the carbohydrate into your bloodstream, then dextrose might be a good choice. And it might actually be the better choice, right? To stave off hunger if you're really, really hungry, for some people. So, but I haven't seen that. Maybe you have, because I don't pay attention so much. I just buy stuff from True Nutrition, whatever I think I need, then I make my own goodies.
I mix my own shakes. Like I'll get what I want and then mix it all in the shaker cup. Another thing I noticed too, I do like the combo, by the way, of using a small amount of dextrose with my highly branched cyclic dextrin. I noticed that if I were on insulin, I may still go hypo intra-workout with highly branched cyclic dextrin alone, and the dextrose seemed to remedy that. Yeah,
it's some insurance against hypoglycemia to have that. It's basically, that's the thing. Like waxy maize, there's what's the name? There's a designer carb. I think it's Trehalose that has a lower glycemic index. They sell on True Nutrition.
Yeah.
That I don't think it sells terribly well, but it's there for like a lower glycemic index. If someone wanted to use a carb source, a supplemental carb source, or a powder as a low glycemic index. Huh. So that's the thing. Dextrose is not. It is a higher glycemic index carb.
Yeah.
At least that's typically what you see in the tables, but individually it's different. And then when you're training, because of this effect on osmolality, the exercise then changes the dynamics of what's happening in terms of glucose absorption, because now you've got your sympathetic nervous system activated, blood flow is shifted away from your gastrointestinal system. So now you're changing things. So I wish there was more stuff on the, at least I haven't looked, but like the Vitargo. I'll just say this. I've bought Vitargo before, and the last batch of Vitargo I bought, it was very bizarre. It wouldn't mix. I put it in my blender, and it would just make this like almost like a waxy sludge that would just be a hardened clumps. It wouldn't mix in and go into solution. It was very bizarre. It was really, and it would do that even if I mixed it, just spud it up with a spoon. And I'm like, I drink my shake, and like all I had was protein because all the carbs was clumped at the bottom of the shaker cup. I'm like, what is this? This is all, and then I have to chew the rest. I have to just eat it. Which didn't taste so good. Yeah. So that was weird. Maybe I just got a bad batch. I don't know. Yeah. But I think it happened to me on a couple of those. So maybe they changed their carb source. Like I said, Vitargo is just a process based on numerous carb sources. So if they change the carb source, you change what comes out of that, right?
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
So that's the thing. Like marketing is what the supplement industry seems like is the biggest deal, and it's not always. You're marketing things to get people aroused and excited to take the product. And when you step back and have to think through it sort of in a grounded, intellectual, scientifically minded, objectively minded fashion, that takes the fun out of it. That's no, like, for a lot of people, it's like, no, I want the stuff that's going to make me huge and make me strong and make me a badass, So give me the fancy colors and give me the cool names, and give me the stuff that actually gives me a buzz or whatever else. Right. I want adrenaline and dopamine, and I want to feel good, and I want to have a monstrous placebo effect that makes me think I'm the man or the woman, whatever, when I go in the gym. Right.
Yeah. I'll pay for that.
And and hey, it's worth it to some degree, Yeah. I think, if you could tell people, ask them under hypnosis, would you buy a product that cost you $100 a month, but made sure that but it had nothing in it. There was actually no effective ingredients whatsoever. It was pure placebo, pure sugar pill, but not even a sugar pill, just flavorings and colors. Right. And it literally had nothing that had any physiological, neurological, no biological effect whatsoever, but the most amazing placebo effect. Probably a lot of people would say, I might buy it myself, man. If you were to tell me like, hey, this has nothing in it, but if you take it, you're going to feel on top of the world. You're going to feel like you're the man. I'd be like, all right, sold. How much is it? 100? I'll give you 2. Right. There's a study with elite level athletes where they were polled, would it be okay for your coaches to lie to you about something? If it would improve your performance. And like almost all of them, a majority of them said yes. I can't remember the numbers. The study's a little foggy in my head, but so it makes sense. So then you're in hypnosis, you answer that question, of course, and you don't remember having answered the question. So you don't know that what you're getting is, there's nothing in it. It's pure placebo. Yeah. But it wouldn't matter. It's a placebo effect.
It worked.
Right?
That's all we wanted. That's all we wanted to begin with,
Yeah. And the thing about that placebo effect, though, you still can't completely shirk, human physiology. So if the placebo, so this is the interesting thing. This is where like the placebo effects are really tricky things to study, I think, so next thing you have this placebo effect and you believe that you're like, the famous study, the Dianabol study that I've talked about, getting an RDL, right? Those individuals actually got
don't
stronger.
Say the name of that compound again, though. We're gonna try to.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So
just for
can I
this
say
episode.
the
Yes.
technical name? Okay. So, yeah. So the
let's call it Compound
placebo
X.
study, Compound X, right?
Yeah.
And none of those subjects got that compound. They actually just got placebos. But after the period of time in that study when they believed they were getting that, and of course they went to student health. These were strength and power athletes at a university. They believed they were getting the goodies, and then like the rate of their strength like doubled or tripled over the next 4 or 6 weeks of training. I don't remember the exact details, but it had a tremendous effect. That in of itself, as long as recovery and everything is on point, and the fact that you believe that you're on the goodies, means your behavior is going to change. Maybe you start, you say, you know what, I got to make sure I eat enough. I'm going to eat a little bit more so that I grow. Because I want to make sure I don't miss out on any of the potential growth possibilities by under eating. So I eat some more, and I'm training harder because I believe I'm on the goodies, and I'm super stoked. I'm on the turbo juice or whatever you want to call it, and everything else around the training, the recovery, they become more focused, they become more diligent, they become more motivated, and how they behave, even though there's no true direct physiological anabolic effect at play that's turning on genes to produce greater rates of muscle synthesis or what have you, they're doing all the other things around protein synthesis that are supportive of muscle growth and recovery. That's where it happens, right? And the question is like, I would love to a study, which I don't think we can do probably, would be, well, they could, is give, like you could do a study where you, we'd have the Boston study, but look at all the underlying behaviors that change when you tell someone they're getting something. So you could do a study where you say you could get a placebo, you could get the substance, right? And you could do a study where you tell everyone they're getting the substance, and some get the placebo and some get the substance, right? And then look and see what happens to their behavior otherwise. So you have a pre-training period like they did in this particular study I mentioned. And then you see, like, now everyone's on the goodies. We're going to see what happens. And some get it and some don't. And look and see what happens. See how much you could see from that study to some degree, to what extent the actual substance made the difference in gains versus the placebo effect made the difference in gains. We see this in drug studies, where the placebo effect, overall is tremendously powerful. So you can get like what percentage of the variance, what percentage in the improvements was based on a placebo effect. And that would be interesting to do in the context of bodybuilding with an anabolic substance. I don't know that you could get something like that passed from a human subjects committee, but it'd be fascinating to see, like, okay, we're going to put you on a bicycle of substances that is going to make you grow, right?
Yeah.
And you believe it. And sometimes people can tell people get bunk stuff and like, okay, something's changed, those are usually higher level people who've been at it for a while and they've been on for a while. So they know exactly. But if you take some people who are naive to that, right, like in this particular, in the RDL study, it would be really interesting to see to what extent, and especially afterwards, what do you think how effective did you feel like this substance was? Right? Oh, on a 0 to 10, it was an 8, it was a 9. And see, like, the people who actually got it, did they say it was an 8? What was the difference in the rating of the effectiveness of the substance, placebo versus the actual substance itself? Yeah. And that all relates back to the supplement industry, is like, if you believe, this is why they use, the big star bodybuilders, like, makes you think that's Roddy Coleman and Kai Green and Lee Priest and all these guys. This is why they look like this, because this is one of their secrets. Secrets of the pros, right? And although if you ask those people, no, I don't really think that's why Ronnie Coleman looks like that. But still, there's still they will still keep doing that for some reason. I think it still helps sales to have a big name athlete there.
Absolutely,
it means
it does.
They got power. There's something powerful about that on our subconscious. So anyway, I think that'd be a phenomenal study, is just tell everybody they're getting the goodies and half of them not. And the thing is, you have to, this is where the problem would come into play. In that particular study, they had to lie to those people who got the placebo. Yeah. They lied to them extensively. They took them to the student health and ran through like all the side effects you might experience, and the And like, we thank you
Oh,
so
yeah.
much for your contribution to the scientific community because you're taking a risk and taking these dangerous substances, right?
Right.
So it was an extensive expectancy that they established by going through that rigmarole. So you would have to be lying, and is that athletes say they wouldn't mind if their coach lied to them if it worked. So, is that an ethical lie? Is that okay to do? That's an ethical question. So anyway, that would be just an interesting study because you could do the same thing. There's studies with placebo studies with caffeine. I've got an article on Elite FTS I wrote about this where they basically told, for instance, cyclists, you're getting different doses of caffeine.
Yeah.
And the cyclists are well aware of caffeine being ergogenic. Right. And there was a graded dose response in terms of the ergogenic effect based on the dose of caffeine that the cyclists got. So the higher the dose of caffeine they thought they got, none of them got caffeine. Caffeine's pretty easy to tell.
Yeah.
Right? None of them got caffeine. Huh. They all thought they did. And there was a graded dose response, placebo response, dose response curve for the placebo effect based on what they thought they got. Yeah. So you take that, extrapolate it out, and try to produce some external validity from that. It's like the better, more convincing your supplement is, the more likely to get a placebo effect, and the more likely people are going to come back and buy that thing.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
We got HBCDs in there, right? It's in there. It's maybe a small component, right? Or it's, 5 out of the 25 grams, but it's in there. And that's the good stuff.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that the pros take, right? Or whatever. And it may be that physiologically it almost has a null effect, but true effect, but it will have a physiological effect because it have a psychological effect because if it's a placebo, if the supplement creates that expectancy that, I'm on the goodies. I'm on the goods. Yeah. So anyway, that's a long tirade, but I find it all fascinating that, people keep on like supplements. You want to take everything. And some of it's just like, hey, I got the extra money. This is my hobby. What the heck? Not trying to say anyone's silly for taking a bunch of supplements.
Yeah, it can be a fun pastime to be like, hey, I want to try something different.
Absolutely. It's a blast.
But the cost can get up there. So feeling like you absolutely need it in order to be able to do this thing we love, that's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people differ. Some people are like, it's cool. It's cool to just, I would like to tinker around and see if I noticed an effect, and they're keeping everything else constant. And that's the fun part. If I add this thing to my hot rod and I drive it, is my 0 to 60, reduced by 0.2 of a second. Yeah. And the other people are just like, I don't care. I'm just throwing it in my car because it feels badass to have this thing. The engine sounds different, right? They'll take the placebo effect all day long, and they're not really, it's not fun for them to be meticulous about it. Yeah.
But with all that said, guys, just by watching this podcast, you're going to be 10% stronger in the gym at your next workout. It has been scientifically proven that you are going to be stronger, that you're going to get more reps. And believe it or not, the recovery you're going to get this following week is going to be better than it ever has before. I'm not kidding. 100% truth right there. This is a fact. Ask Scott Stevenson. He's a doctor. He knows.
Yeah. And you'll be a 10% better informed consumer of supplements. So your supplement choices, whatever they might be, will be better informed now that you've listened to my little diatribe on the placebo effect and supplement use.
Yeah, so we got it.
Save money. So if you want to, send that money to the podcast, send it to Scott to support, get a Patreon membership or whatever. Lie to me, baby. Yep.
Yeah, lie to me. And then we also
that I wrote.
We got good leg day tomorrow. I'll take 10%. You got it, man. I promise you that. We already see it. It's already happened. Guys, thanks for tuning in to this live stream with Scott Stevenson and myself, Scott McNally. As we mentioned, True Nutrition, use our code THINK to get some savings over there. And I do believe in their highly brain cyclic Dextrin. It's a great freaking product. And if you want to add dextrose to it, you can do that on your own, make your own ratios. Go over to byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book there. It's like the podcast, but it's on paper, and you can read it, and you can read it all day long. You can hang out with Scott Stevenson all day long and keep learning from him. And I've got the link to the hardcover as well in the description. We appreciate the hell out of you guys. Thank you to everybody from Patreon. I don't think we got to all your Patreon questions today. Scott had a bunch of other stuff we wanted to cover, but I always appreciate you guys and everything you're doing to help the show. And supplementsource.ca for our Canadians. Thank you guys over there. If you're in Canada, get some good deals. Scott, any closing words for the day?
No, that's it. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for the questions on Instagram. I don't remember if we got to those. We talked about them.
We did.
Sure we got to some of them. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
we did a bunch of them.
They all blended together. So yeah, that's cool that people
What's your puppy doing right now?
She's actually finally sleeping.
Okay, then don't interrupt her. I was gonna say let's see her again, but let's not interrupt that.
That's fine. Well, now I can watch her.
Oh,
now I can watch her. So now I can pick her up.
All right, let's see her.
Bring her over.
Let's see her.
Hold on a sec. See if I can get her.
Guys, it's puppy time here.
Your little Jessie. Oh, that's my stuff.
Puppy time. It's puppy time. Puppy time. I miss my dog, but we still have little Maddie, and she's a little sweetheart. I just can't give her big hugs because she's tiny. So my big pit bull, I could just wrap my arms around her and give her big old hugs. And Maddie, she's great though. She's been doing the best she can as our only child. Tell me sweet lies. Yes, Eric, the more you listen, the more anabolic you become. And here's Jesse. How's Jesse doing? Oh, he can't hear me yet. And how is Jesse doing today?
Jesse's doing wonderfully. She's awful sleepy now. You get some Jessie kisses?
She looks so sweet. I can't imagine her chewing anything up, Scott.
Yeah. What do you think, huh? Oh, yeah. She's a little chewer.
Aww.
She's getting better at it, though. She's a little kisser, too. She's a little lover.
She's sweet. How old is she now?
Like 14 weeks.
14
I got her the day after our last podcast, actually.
You got her before that because we saw her on the show before.
You sure?
Yep. Oh, believe me. You believe you me. Oh, I would not forget that face.
I don't remember that, actually. I thought I got her 2 weeks ago on Sunday afterwards. Maybe I got her on a Saturday.
You must have been Saturday then, because I know you had just gotten her real recently. And because I played the video back after we were done and showed Victoria, too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now she's nibbling. Yeah, there she goes. Little nibbler. Go get some kisses instead of nibbles. Get some kisses instead of nibbles. Yeah, she's absolutely... Suki picked her out.
Yeah.
We play. We probably do 4 hours of play a day, at least. And she follows me everywhere.
Yeah.
I was doing vertical leg presses yesterday, and she came in and decided to lick me on the back of my legs while I was training.
While you're in the middle of the set?
Oh, yeah. That's what she does.
Yeah.
New bison.
My dogs always get away from me when I'm training. They'll hang out, but then when the set starts, they kind of back up. And Betsy always knew. She knew to give me space. So sometimes she'd be right under me when I was getting ready to do dumbbells, and I'd say, "Okay, look out!" And she'd take a few steps away from me and then lay down and watch.
She's just fearless as far as that goes. She sits inside the frame of my Iron Master.
Yeah,
I was doing I think stiff-legged deadlifts a couple of workouts ago.
Yeah,
in there, and she's. And she was literally right next to my feet, and the barbell was just dropping down, and she was asleep.
Yeah,
she was sleeping. Yes.
All right. Well, I appreciate you bringing her over and showing her to everybody.
Yeah, she's a little crazy beast.
Guys, for another episode of Muscle Minds, we will see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Adios.